Hi there, my name's James Combridge. I'm a concept artist and illustrator working for video games, film and animation over the past decade. I'm creating a video series tailored towards concept artists, outlining everything I wish I knew when I was starting out. Part 1 in this series is going to talk about the what and the why of concept art, what it is, what it isn't, what it's used for, what problems it solves, and how it fits into a production pipeline for games and film. I should also preface this by saying this is based on my own experience working in-house and freelance over the course of my career, so do take it with a grain of salt. If you're another professional and you feel like there's anything I missed in this video, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. So let's get started. How would I describe concept art to my younger self? I thought about this a lot, and the best summary that I can come up with is that it's visual communication that solves problems for a production team. That's really all it is at its core. So you'll see lots of different kinds of art produced for lots of different kinds of products, but at the end of the day, it boils down to this. There's 3 main pillars of good design that should be taken into consideration regardless of production, and those are functionality, both with the design itself and how it integrates with the production pipeline, narrative, how the design supports the story, and aesthetics, following good design fundamentals. So, let's briefly look at some references for concept art that falls under that category of visual communication that solves problems for a production team. So here's a great place to start. Already, we're seeing quite a variation in the types of artworks that are being produced, but these all fall under the category of concept art because, again, they're solving a particular problem for a production team. So something like this sci-fi design here would be solving purely design and aesthetics, and depending on the other information that was available to a 3D team, could be passed over to them in order to model. A design like this is hitting on all 3 aspects of functionality, narrative, and aesthetics. So solving for what does it look like, how does it tell a story, and how does it work. This artwork here would be solving for narrative and aesthetics, less so functionality because this is an early exploratory piece. We've got animation production design, solving for all 3, and being broken down into a digestible format for the 3D team to then build. So again, completely different, but another form of visual instruction for an environment artist who's building at a game level for how they should treat the foliage as we transition from land to water, with some clear references as well. Whereas something like this, which we have some final designs here, which can serve as a visual benchmark for the 3D team to create, but we also have some exploration thumbnails here. And what problem does that solve? Well, this here facilitates a conversation between a concept artist, an art director or creative director to quickly decide on a direction for the foliage in a really efficient and cost-effective manner. So these examples here, much more tailored towards communicating with a 3D team, but solving all 3 pillars of functionality, narrative, and aesthetics, and providing a blueprint for the rest of production. Same here, with some notes on functionality and how the object works, orthographic turnarounds with cutaways to clearly communicate the design to the modelers, a faction style guide for other designers and the 3D team to reference when they're creating characters and objects that relate to a certain faction, iterations on a theme to present options, sketches exploring layout and shape design, prop designs, and functionality, a layout key accompanied by some visual development sketches to establish the look and feel of a particular zone, and finally, keyframe illustrations solving the problem of what is the final product going to look like, whether that's for an environment, mood, lighting, story, design, or all of the above in some cases. So that's a very short summary of what I would say concept art is. So what is it not? Well, to put it as briefly as possible, it's not just a pretty picture that gets 100,000 views on ArtStation. Now at this point you might be thinking to yourself, hold up, I've seen artworks with 100,000 views on ArtStation, and some of them look like this. So isn't that the same thing? Well, you're partially right. Some of these are kick-ass artworks, and they do get a lot of views on ArtStation. And when I was first starting out, I had a lot of trouble differentiating between what was just a pretty picture and what was concept art, because I was seeing all these different kinds of art, but I didn't know exactly what they were for. So what's the difference? The difference is they were created with intent to solve a problem. Again, back up to our definition at the top. So I would say that's the main difference. But again, when I was first starting out, I didn't actually know what problems I was solving for. So that's what I want to talk about next, and that is the why. So why is it being created, and what problems are being solved? Well, to do this, we need to understand the production pipeline. So we're going to look at each stage of a production, from pre-production, production to post-production, and walk through a range of problems that arise during the course of it, their solutions as it applies to concept art, and I'll provide some examples as well, and hopefully that'll provide a little bit of extra context to help us understand what it is and how we can apply that knowledge to our own practice and portfolios. So, first problems during pre-production are a lack of clear visual identity. There is undefined or vague world-building ideas, undefined characters and environment themes. There's a lack of visual material for pitching the project to investors, and there's an undefined starting point to inspire further pre-production designs. So a concept artist can come in and solve those problems by creating key art or mood boards to establish style, tone, narrative, and mood for story, characters, and environments. This is often referred to as the blue sky or exploration phase, and these can also double as pitch pieces for investment rounds. So you'll see this often on ArtStation. There'll be environment keys, character keys, story keyframe illustrations. This can also involve some material exploration and some thumbnail sketches and world building sheets exploring early design language, mood, tone, and lighting. So for some examples here, we've got some early gestural work for the creator, which is quite loose, but definitely establishes the direction for design, the gritty tone, and some of the cinematography. We've got slightly more polished pieces for various IPs. The Last of Us you'll be familiar with. It's early work establishing the design direction for different zones, early explorations for the Avatar game and Star Wars Battlefront. So really clearly setting the bar for the direction for the rest of production. There's some Transformers concepts, early concept work, setting the direction for Jedi Survivor, and some mood explorations. So what's another problem that needs solving in pre-production? Well, there could be an undefined art direction for consistency across the project. So often stylized IPs especially, whether that's an animation or a stylized game, we'll need something like this to steer the direction for the product. And so a viz dev artist, concept artist, and art director, sometimes all three, will define a style guide with the color palettes, materials, reference sheets for anything from forms to textures, lighting treatment. Depends on the project. But this is another early phase of pre-production where we can see anything from this example for layout that I mentioned, or some style guides on the treatment of character creation, some reference sheets for architecture, explorations on style, explorations for texture style, or stylization of certain biomes within a game setting, exploring the graphic style. So this is Rob Rappel's work for Into the Spider-Verse, who did a lot of great work in the pre-production phase. More character stuff, some look dev for props and painterly stylized assets, and some of these have elements of look dev and early pre-production, and some of these I've included a few later pre-production stages as well. So for example, something like this here might be early look dev phase, and if this was a game, it looks like they would have taken something like this and blocked out a basic environment using simple shapes. And then some of this stuff is sort of later phase pre-production work where we're going over the top of that and applying the same style, showing a bit of functionality as well. So next problem, there could be an undefined sequence of shots, plotting out key story beats from the script. And there could also be an undefined broad vision for lighting, color palette, and set design for a film, cutscene, or animated sequence. So I've put storyboards, color scripts, and visual development here. The reason I've separated that from the above step is that this is something where there's a little bit of overlap in the sense that the visual identity of the product is still being defined, but we're a little bit further along in pre-production now, to the point where a storyboard can be defined if it's any kind of film, animation, or cutscene. And from there, a color script can be built up, or if it's for a game, maybe there's explorations for different times of day in the same setting. And it should be noted that storyboard artist is its own specialization, as is visual development. So coming up with color scripts, overall visual direction for a product. So sometimes it can be taking a storyboard and converting that to a colored version as a visual benchmark for the production team to aim for, but it can also involve set design that may even be used in the final product, depending on the project. So the reason I mention this is because in some smaller productions, it's often more cost effective to have, say, a storyboard artist that can also do prop and set design, or a concept artist that knows how to do storyboards. And so it's definitely a relevant tool set to have if that's something you're interested in. So next problem. There's an undefined final look benchmark for key environments or story frames, including lighting, mood, VFX, set design, and materials. So again, slight double up with pre-production, keyframe illustrations, similar to early exploration, and pitch pieces, but with a more defined and established art direction. So this can be a key story beat from the storyboards and color script for a video game cutscene or a key game environment location. Oftentimes, one of these will be chosen and taken to a higher level of finish to act as a visual benchmark. Now, there's definitely some overlap between this first phase and this phase down here, in that sometimes pieces like this can still be used as pitch pieces, exploratory keys, and this phase here, where we're doing similar kinds of keys, but after some things have been established. And sometimes these early explorations, if they're completed to a high enough degree of polish, that's all that's really required. And this phase of key art can be skipped entirely. It should be worth noting as well that sometimes things like environment keys may indeed be created after all the designs in an environment, say, have been clearly defined. So designs first, lighting second, if you will, instead of design, lighting, layout all in one go. So it depends on the production. Next problem, inefficient iteration and feedback loops. So this one's a big one, and it's not necessarily a phase of production per se, but it's more so an idea that I think is worth bringing up, and I'll show you an example of why. So let's say I'm an art director and I need an asset created, and I go to a 3D modeler and I say, build this asset. The 3D modeler goes away, builds an asset, gives an update. The art director then comes in and provides some feedback and says, okay, not quite there. Let's change this, this, and this. And they do that multiple times for forms, silhouette, functionality, materials, and it ends up being many, many rounds of feedback before they get to the final product. Even working with a concept artist, producing work in a single version at a time is highly, highly inefficient. Alternatively, a concept artist can come in and give the art director 10 variants to choose from. They can choose one, select one or two that they like, and same thing. We go from exploratory variations to iterations. So taking these notes and creating a selection of other versions that the art director can choose from. They might choose that, provide some more notes, and in the later stages of design, less variations are probably required at this point. They can provide a few variants to nail down the final design, and then the final direction is decided upon. So this is the whole reason, in short, that a concept artist profession exists, is because this process here, because of the nature of the tools that a concept artist has at their disposal, and because of the nature of the fast turnaround of lots of choices, this is saving a production time and money. So looking at these examples, you can see all of them exploring different options for the same environment, many, many different options for the same watchtower. So in a game like Battlefield, for example, it might seem crazy to some of you that there's this level of variations presented for a watchtower, but an art director and a game designer can look at these and decide which one works the best aesthetically, but also functionally within the game setting. So in a competitive multiplayer environment, the design of all the different kinds of window placements, the visibility of the graphic read of the tower, if there's open space underneath, all of these have gameplay implications. So presenting as many different kinds of combinations of design as possible is a way more efficient method to arrive at the best solution. So the same concept of explorations, variations, iterations, and refinement applies to pretty much any art that's created. So I thought that was definitely worth mentioning. Last problem, and this is the meat and potatoes of pre-production, and that is undefined key locations, props, assets, characters, costumes, with no clear concept to production pipeline. So this, in a broad sense, we can refer to as production concept art. And this right here is the majority of the work that a concept artist is going to undertake in their day-to-day, or these last two phases. Lots and lots of iteration and variation, refinement, and lots of packaging up the finalized designs into a digestible format for the 3D team. So if it's character work, providing front and back views, turnarounds, removing components to show what's underneath, turnarounds or orthographic views. For sets, these days it's very common to accompany a set design with a 3D blockout, because often environment concept artists will have a basic 3D knowledge in their skill set, providing different angles and notes on functionality, providing prop or design sheets showing specific props that need building with material callouts. So now we move on to some production phase concept art, and this one is more of a summary, so we'll work through it quickly. But some problems that can arise is that there can be an ambiguity in how designs translate to production assets. There can be unclear spatial relationships or set design logic. Some designs might need changing due to technical or narrative shifts during production, and sometimes variations are needed for established designs. So in the solutions column, things that a concept artist will tackle, again, providing more detailed callouts and orthographic views for complex designs. For modelers or texture artists, so picking up anything that may have been left, or a modeler might come back to the pre-production team with some questions, we could quickly iterate on revised designs while adhering to established visual language. So mid-production concept art, the direction is much more narrow, there's less room for exploration, and there's a much bigger emphasis on matching what's already been established. There could be a need to create layout maps or top-down schematics, 3D mock-ups for spatial clarity. So sometimes there could be a set design that has showcased a particular angle, but there might be some question once the design has been filled out as to what's happening around the corner or what's happening in certain spaces that have been undefined. And lastly, creating variants based on a theme. So not necessarily revising a design, but what we see here is a great example. So something like this could potentially function as a loading screen or as a mock-up for mood for the same zone using the same layout, but with a different faction. Work like this could be pre-production work, but it could also be production work, just looking at it, because some of these pieces, there's a heavy emphasis on showing as much information as possible. So not letting the mood and lighting overshadow the communication of foliage placement and weathering, especially for these two images here. So the difference between this and, let's say, a story keyframe illustration is that sometimes a story illustration can focus much more heavily on a story beat and the mood and lighting. So if this was a foggy, dramatic morning, it'd be great to show mood, but it wouldn't be great to communicate texture information, prop placement, and layout. Character or weapon skins, if we're in a game, and a lot of live service games, the concept art would fall into this category. So designing new things to fit an existing style. And lastly, we've got a few post-production problems and solutions for concept artists to provide, and that can be missing reference materials. Sometimes the final shots don't match the intended look or feel, so experimenting with lighting and VFX, or providing reference for the matte painters to take something to final. So again, for the same reason, the ability to quickly iterate on an option so a direction can be chosen for the final VFX shot to take place. And finally, at the end of production, once the product is being promoted, there will be a need for high quality marketing and promotional materials. So polishing up existing key art or creating new key art where the production is mostly finished, the designs are defined, the art direction is defined. And so these illustrations will focus purely on promotion. Sometimes they can be double up with promotional materials and things like loading screens or game backgrounds. So that's a very broad summary, and it's probably a good time to talk about the different roles a concept artist has during production and how that can translate to specializations. So the first two main specializations are character design and environment design. In most cases, there'll be overlap between these and props. There'll be viz dev artists, storyboard artists. These and these are their own specialized roles quite often, but depending on the artist, there can be overlap. Some artists have a broad knowledge and can tackle all of these things. Some concept artists specialize solely on film and keyframe concept art, and often they'll be tackling a lot of aspects of design for these and these. And there'll be further subcategories of specialization for someone who's good at environment props, for example. And these are their own sub-disciplines that one can specialize in. So without getting too far down into the nitty-gritty, these are probably some of the overarching ones across film and game. And often you'll see artists specialize in a number of these things. So if you were a concept artist starting out and wanting to break into the industry as quickly as possible, and you wanted your work to compete with other junior and mid-level positions, often you'll hear advice to specialize on a particular niche. So let's say it's environments and props, which by extension, I would say cover these aspects as well. In terms of time investment, mastering a specific niche is going to be faster, with the caveat that you can only be hired for roles that cover your area of expertise. So it's a great place to start, and once you're in the industry, you can develop some other skills to broaden your skill set. Another branch of all of these disciplines would be 3D. It could be UI design and creation. It could be 3D for concept, or enough knowledge of 3D that you're able to bridge pre-production and production much more easily. So for example, if you're an environment designer that has a good enough knowledge of 3D and game engines, that you can help with level design and block out, that you can help with problem solving for modularity and trim sheets, then that gives you a further level of specialization that you can bring to a production team. If you had an even broader skill set, you could stack all of these skills and start to take on more senior roles. So there's definitely other pathways for the level of experience required from these roles. So sometimes art directors and producers, directors of photography, will come from a more film or producing background. Often a storyboard artist, that being its own profession, could also have experience as DP. So if you're just starting out, it's good to know about these different directions that you might take. It's also good to be aware that each of them is its own area of expertise. I think most relevant to concept artists in a broad sense is these categories here. That's kind of the bread and butter of concept art. And so if you're just starting out and you want to build up a portfolio and skill set that makes you hireable, it's good to know that each of these can be considered a building block that represents a time investment in terms of the time it takes to learn the fundamentals. Then this should give you a good overview and help you decide what you'd like to focus on in order to break in as soon as possible. It's also just as valid to say, well, I want to focus on a bit of everything. It might take me a bit longer to learn, but it's going to make me much more versatile and much more of an asset to a production team. So it might be a good time now to take a look back at my art career, observe some of the things I learned, how that affected what jobs I could take, and what advice I would give to my younger self if I was starting out again. So for me, I'm self-taught, and it started out as a hobby, and my main areas of interest was environments environment illustrations, landscape paintings. And so this kind of evolved into being interested in and learning environment design, prop design, 3D, keyframes, and background illustration. So that's where I invested most of my time in terms of creation and learning. And as I developed those skills and updated my portfolio, the kinds of jobs I was approached for was environment illustration, game backgrounds, loading screens, card illustration, environment and prop design. So in terms of my experience, I've developed these skills here, but during that time, I've also had a curious mindset and have really made sure that I learn about other professions, other areas of expertise and what they do, not necessarily becoming an expert at them, but knowing them well enough to where when I'm performing in these roles, I'm better able to solve problems in other departments. And so that's really lent itself to some of these more senior positions where I'm leading the direction for certain projects. So most of my career has been freelance, undertaking this kind of work. And some of it has been in-house and remote contract with a small smattering of freelance keyframe illustration as well. So what advice would I give myself looking back? Well, just looking at this, I've had a heavy emphasis on image making and illustration with a focus on environments. And that's definitely become my comfort zone, where I spent the most time and what I excel at. I think in hindsight, the skills I wish I developed more early on, and these are definitely skills that I want to pivot to in terms of my current focus in my art journey. And those are specifically much more practice with design, specifically sketching, iterations, ideations, and also developing a more solid foundational knowledge of characters, creatures, and anatomy. But these three things here, I wish were more of a focus and are going to be a very large focus for me moving forward, because those are the ones that I felt like required the most amount of effort and that I felt the highest amount of friction with. And the reason I say that is because I would have much more mileage, which would mean I would have a much stronger ability. I'd be able to showcase more of that work in my portfolio, which by extension would make me more hireable and more confident and much more effective doing the things I already do. So that was a bit of a tangent, but I think it's an important one, and hopefully you found it useful. I would definitely say the overarching skill, without question, that you should prioritize as a concept artist is your sense of design and getting a lot of mileage focusing on design and lots of sketching, because the amount of time you invest in these skills is going to elevate anything else you do as a designer. So that's going to be my focus moving into 2025, and that'll also be my core area of focus for my YouTube content and courses that I create in the coming year. So we've talked about the what and the why, the problems and solutions and different niche roles that a concept artist might take. And the reason I've started 2025 with a video like this is because it's really going to set the groundwork for everything else I create this year. And from here on out, there's going to be a heavy focus on the how. So if you're interested in learning concept art, environment design, prop design, if you'd like to follow along with my journey of improving my ability as a designer and sharing that journey and knowledge here on YouTube, then consider subscribing. And if you'd like to see my process for taking a weapon design from start to finish, you can click on this video here, and I'll see you in the next one.